Gremlins! Welcome to the final video about the creation of clothing for the Halloween shop drop. I have 2 more thrifted t-shirts to paint, and the vague theme for the graphics of these shirts is anatomy. These graphic tees, as well as the other 4 shirts I've painted over the last month, will be posted on my Etsy store on October 3rd, which is only a few days away now. Subscribe and follow me on Instagram to get notified when the sale starts. With all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get started! I technically started with the shirt that will come second in this video, but I also finished with that shirt as it was the most time-consuming design of all 6, so I'll start by showing the process of painting the other shirt. Here's the rough sketch I drew, and here's that sketch transferred to a thrifted size 12 black t-shirt. This t-shirt might be more of a t-shirt dress, it's very long at least, but if you plan to buy it and don't want a t-shirt dress, it can probably be cropped. The graphic for this t-shirt is an anatomical heart dripping blood. Since this is a colourful graphic, I started with a layer of white mixed with some red to make a pastel pink underlayer. I'm using several Google images of heart diagrams to figure out the shape of this design. I've never taken an anatomy class, and I'm just doing this design for the cool look of it. The first layer of paint is very patchy, but it doesn't matter since I'll be painting over it. Moving on to the layers that would be visible in the final product, I mixed a slightly muted shade of red and painted the main body of the heart, then shaded it with an even darker shade of red in which I mixed some dark blue. I then used more of that dark blue, slightly offset with some red, to paint the veins. I think the blue ones are veins. I know they aren't actually blue, but some blood is darker than other blood depending on whether it has oxygen, and all the diagrams show red and blue. I made the vein look round by adding a shadow before painting the next blue vein, and added some stripes like the diagram had, although I'm not sure if those are present on a real heart. They don't show up much anyway, so if they are inaccurate, I hope it's ignorable. I finished work on the blue section by making the cross-sections of the tubes black. I then mixed some more red into my blue paint to make it a muted purple, and used that colour of paint to draw veins over the surface of the heart. By then the blue paint had dried enough for me to paint the arteries without smudging them, so I made a brighter shade of red to begin painting those. I added the same shading to the arteries as I gave the veins, except using red instead of blue for the shadows, of course. Finally, I painted the blood dripping from the bottom of the heart, using the same bright red. I added a bit of shading to the blood droplets, and a tiny amount of white as a highlight. The graphics were really easy to paint. I got it done in a few hours in one evening, and I think it turned out really well. I'll show off the results of this shirt at the end of the video, but in the meantime, a complete contrast, a design that took me nearly 5 hours across a week, having to wait for each layer to dry completely before continuing. This design is the only design in the Halloween drop that has a graphic on both the front and the back of the shirt, which is a huge part of the reason that this shirt took a long time to paint. This design is a rib cage, overgrown with moss and vines, and here is the sketch I made before starting. Here is the front of the shirt with the sketch, and here is the sketch on the back. This shirt is a size medium. I started by painting the rib cage on the front of the shirt. Painting a rib cage on both the front and the back is what made this shirt take nearly a week to finish. I finished all the bones on the front of the shirt first, then when they had completely dried, flipped the shirt over to paint the back. Each part of the ribcage took 3 coats to finish. The first coat is just white paint mixed with the fabric medium that makes these shirts safe to wash and wear. I'm speeding through this part of the process because it took a long time and I don't think it's very interesting to watch. Also, my head was in the way so much during this filming. I was just facepalming as I edited my footage. I cannot seem to figure out where the camera is above me and stay out of its way. The second coat is the coat that took the longest. On this coat, I gave each bone a bit of shading with white and light grey, starting with the shoulder blades. My head is even more in the way here. Ignore how messy my hair is. The shading on the bones is simple, just enough to keep the bones from looking completely flat, but not very noticeable. The final coat was very quick, just adding some extra white highlights to any section of bone that looked too grey, and some darker grey shadows to the vertebrae and shoulder blades where the ribs would block the light. I made sure the front ribcage was fully dry before flipping the shirt over to start on the back. The back is even more detailed than the front, with the entire spine as well as more ribs. I filmed the first layer of white paint, but at this point I was slightly panicking about running out of time, so I finished the back of the ribcage and spine off camera at night. Sorry, but it was too dark to film properly and I just needed to get it done. I made sure to add lots of shading to the vertebrae, copying the shading on diagrams and fake spines on Google Images. Finally, I got to move on to the fun part of this design. Once I got started on all the overgrowth on the bones, it came easily to me, but before starting I was really anxious that I would mess everything up. I even had a stress dream where I accidentally painted the whole shirt inside out. Don't worry, I didn't. I started the overgrowth process by mixing 5 different shades of green paint with my fabric medium and dabbing them in patches onto the bones, making it appear that patches of moss are growing on some of the vertebrae and ribs. Even just adding this small amount of green detail was already elevating this design, and I started to stress a lot less. This ribcage shirt has a lot of the same motifs as the Forest Punk overalls I showed off on the channel a bit under 2 months ago. White ribs and vertebrae are painted against a black background, with patches of bright green moss and tangled vines with small leaves wrapped around the bones. If you liked the forest punk pants design, this shirt would be perfect for you. When I finished adding moss to the back, I began carefully drawing the stems of vines, going back to add the leaves later. One long vine is wrapped around vertebrae, another twists between ribs. I made sure that any small smudges of white paint from my bone painting got conveniently covered with vines or leaves, which is one of the good things about adding this layer of plants. There are two species of vines on this shirt. The first one I drew has very dark green leaves with 3 points to them, a similar shape to an ivy leaf but much smaller. The second species of vine is bright green, with simple almond-shaped leaves that I made using my brush like a stamp. One of these simpler vines is draped over one of the shoulder blades to break up an area of blank white space that needed more detail. Finally, I flipped the shirt over for the last time and began to add overgrowth to the front of the ribcage, once again starting with moss. This was the day after working on the back, but I kept my green paint in a sealed container, so adding a bit more fabric medium was enough to revitalize the colors I used for the moss at least. The paint was maybe a bit thicker than I would have liked, not quite as nice to work with, but it worked fine. I did mix up fresh paint for the vines, however. Once again, I added the moss in patches, leaving some ribs bare and covering others in green. I spaced out the moss throughout the graphic, trying to keep it balanced looking without any one space being too blank or too busy. Also, once again my head keeps getting in the way of the camera, but at least this time the camera isn't autofocusing as much on my head. The same species of vines I created on the back of the shirt were present on the front. I started by painting the ivy-like vine, twisting it through several ribs near the bottom of the shirt, then behind the vertebrae to the other side of the ribs, finally twisting around the vertebrae themselves. I added a separate tendril of vine around the clavicle, then added the leaves. Unfortunately, I don't know what went wrong, but the camera stopped recording, so all the leaves were painted in effectively off-camera. My filming method is to place a phone on the table above where I work, filming down over the edge, and I think the paint tube I placed to counterbalance the phone may have pressed the stop recording button, only a few minutes after I started. I was able to restart the filming process for the final vines, the bright green ones, which I made wrap around any sections of the ribcage that were otherwise leafless. I finished this very time-consuming t-shirt by adding leaves to those last vines. Then I was done, and let the shirts dry overnight before ironing them, to be sure the paint was set in place. Now, time to show off my work. All 6 shirts for the Halloween 2024 drop are complete. Now, to show off the finished anatomy shirts, starting with the one that I started second, but finished first. This t-shirt is a size 12, and it might actually be a t-shirt dress. It's very long. It could be cropped if you wanted it to be a shorter shirt. The design doesn't go that far down. This design was one of the quickest designs to paint out of all 6 designs I made for the Halloween drop. The mushroom eyes might have been a bit quicker, but this one I did finish in 1 day, whereas the mushroom eyes I did over 2 days. This particular shirt I finished all in one evening. It's about 2 layers of paint on each area, maybe 3 in a few places where I did some shading. And even though I might not be into anatomy in anything other than the aesthetic of organs, I think it looks really cool, and I'm really proud of it. Of course, I'm prouder of this one. From the shirt that took me the shortest amount of time to the shirt that took me the longest amount of time, I'm so happy with how this kind of came out. Even though, throughout the process, I was doubting myself and thought, oh no, I'm going to mess this entire thing up. I definitely had some stress dreams about this shirt. but I'm so happy with how it came out. It's a front and back design, which is part of the reason it took so long, and the motifs of it, the bones overgrown with moss and vines, are similar to a lot of the motifs I used in my Forest Punk Pant video. This one is probably the best to see in the B-reel. It's hard to show all the details from this far away because there are just so many details, but don't worry, I think I already put in some closer-up shots in the video, so you will be able to see the detail of all the vines and the moss and the bones. This shirt is a size medium. So with that, happy Halloween to all, and remember to check my YouTube community tab and my Instagram on October 3rd, where I'll be posting at the same time as I post all the stuff to Etsy. Until then, bye!